I'm glad you enjoyed it. So let's talk a little bit about what we did. So I'm going to break down in the lecture what is mindfulness. We're going to talk about the structures of the brain that are actually affected by continuous mindfulness practice. And we'll also have a discussion at the end of different ways that you can practice mindfulness, because I understand yoga is not for everyone. I understand meditation is not for everyone. And mindfulness doesn't have to be restricted to those two activities. We can be mindful in a number of ways. And so keep that in mind as we're going through this lecture of ways that maybe you already are practicing mindfulness or ways that you'd like to start. And we'll talk about that at the very end. And we'll save all questions for the very end, unless it's absolutely pressing and you can't wait. Could you put up the PowerPoint, please? Okie dokie. Those are the objectives, so we can skip that. All right, so a little bit about myself, and I guess I should do that before I walk you through this whole yoga practice, But my name is Gemma Andaya. I'm a mental health and substance abuse counselor in the Henderson and Las Vegas, Nevada area. Although I do serve the rural communities through like HIPAA compliant video counseling services. So I have clients all throughout Nevada. I'm in private practice. I'm a certified yoga instructor, adjunct faculty here at GBC. I teach substance abuse fundamentals. As Professor Sita mentioned, I taught at UNLV for about 4 years, different human services courses, stress management, introduction to human services, introduction to counseling skills, and substance abuse. I'm also currently a PhD candidate at the University of Cumberland. I'm studying, thank you. I'm studying how to become which is funny because I already am an educator, but how to become a better counselor, educator, supervisor, clinician. So my PhD is in that. And then as far as experience, what populations I've worked with in the past, I've worked in inpatient psychiatric hospital, I've worked in outpatient, I've worked in intake departments, I've worked in foster care system, but my absolute favorite, which is hence why I'm there now, is private practice. So that's a little bit introduction about myself. But I want to introduce you onto how I got all this knowledge that I'm going to present to you. Where did all this material come from? So first of all, I'm going to be presenting to you some of the latest research on neurobiology and the understanding of the brain as Dr. Dan Siegel describes, and a lot of Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's material is in here too. So if you are really interested in how the brain works, those are two people to Google, read their books, read their research articles. They're really advanced. Also, I'm incorporating a lot of what I learned during my 200-hour yoga teacher training with Cheryl Slater in Las Vegas, Nevada. She has like a nonprofit yoga studio, donation-based, in like downtown of Las Vegas. She's an amazing woman. During my yoga teacher training, she had a Swami. A Swami is someone who, you can think of the equivalent of a PhD, someone who studied for 10 years, but they studied in Hindu religion. And so a Swami came and, explained to us the origins of yoga, the different branches of yoga. And so I'm incorporating some of that in here. And then also some of this came through consultation with Dr. Nicole Durs, who is a specialist on trauma recovery yoga, specifically with veterans. You can skip. Okay, so let's talk about the history of mindfulness. So mindfulness was a term that has been coined by Dr. John Kabat-Zinn back in the 1960s. He is a neurobiologist and teacher of, or professor of psychiatry, I think, but don't quote me, UCLA, but I might be wrong about that. He was personally called to the practice of meditation and what is called pranayama or pranayama, which is the practice of breath work. And so he went and studied all of these pranayama, yoga, and meditation in the East, and he wanted to make it accessible to the Western mind. So he coined it mindfulness. And by doing that, he removed all of the religious terminology and made it more scientific and therefore more accessible to the Western mind. So there is 3 components to the definition of what mindfulness is, and we'll talk about each one of those specifically. So we'll just review them here. So mindfulness is a way of paying attention, number 1, on purpose, so choosing to pay attention. Number 2, paying attention to the present moment, the here and the now. And number 3, to pay attention non-judgmentally. So let's break those 3 points down to see what that actually means. The first point is paying attention on purpose or with intention. So this is contrasted with states of mind in which attention is focused elsewhere, where we're preoccupied with memories or fantasies, or maybe we're juggling 10 things at once, right? That's the opposite of paying attention on purpose. So paying attention on purpose means that I'm going to make a conscious effort to focus in on this one thing, and I know that I have intrusive thoughts, and I know that I have intrusive memories, and that I have biological urges that are coming up, but nonetheless, I'm going to focus on whatever it is that I'm focusing on for this time being. I'm allotting this time for this. The second point of mindfulness is paying attention to the present moment, the here and now. So I don't know why the brain works this way. It's probably, actually I do know why. I think it's a survival mechanism so as to always be able to ward off danger, but left to itself, untrained and untamed, the mind will begin to we got some head nods, will begin to just fixate on the future and the what ifs and the could be's and the, trying to just think of all the different outcomes and trying to find the best way possible. And that can lead to anxiety, right? Or left to itself, untrained, untamed, the mind can fixate on the past, all the hurts and the aches. We got plenty of those. I'm sure we've got a long list that we could focus on. So mindfulness is a way of training ourselves to be here and now. Because in this moment, you are safe, we're protected, you have food, water, and shelter, and you're okay. But your mind is living somewhere else, and therefore we're responding as if something's happening. But nothing's happening. Right here, right now, we're okay. And the last, and I think, in my opinion, the most important part of mindfulness practice is paying attention non-judgmentally. And so what that means is without an emotional attachment or reaction to what is happening. So as we're practicing mindfulness, we are having that urge that's coming up, or maybe we're having a craving that's coming up. I think the natural tendency, if we haven't been trained or haven't been taming our mind, is to then judge it. I shouldn't be feeling that. That's bad, right? But instead, a mindful way of approaching that is, okay, this is happening. I'm watching it. I'm feeling it. And we're not judging it as right or wrong. And it's going to pass, right? Everything passes. Nothing is permanent. Um, let's see. Mindfulness is an emotionally non-reactive practice. This means we make a conscious effort to not judge thoughts, feelings, or states as good or bad. And then if we do notice ourselves judging, then we simply know that and then let it go. So for example, as we were practicing our meditation earlier, which if you like the meditation, you can YouTube it. It's called The Wheel of Awareness by Dr. Dan Siegel. I modified it and added my own little couple things in there, but his is really good. So when we were engaged in that meditation, you brought your awareness to what's happening with the sounds around you. You brought your awareness to what am I seeing right now? You brought your awareness to what am I smelling, what am I tasting, and what am I touching? That is totally coming into the present moment. And it's non-judgmental because we're just observing, we're not judging ourselves. But then what happens naturally if we were to stay there a little bit longer, it'd get a little bit more challenging because the thoughts would start. And that little thing in the back of the head will start talking and talking and talking, right? And that's when we can start practicing this last component of non-judgment. Okay, this thought is coming, which if I allow that myself to get hooked and to get emotionally attached to it, it's going to lead to another thought and another thought and another thought. Next thing you know, I'm homeless on the street. Next thing you know, I'm homeless on the street and right, and I'm about to die or something crazy. Yeah. So the non-judgmental part is, okay, I'm having this thought. It's not a fact. It's just a thought. I'm going to watch it. I'm not going to latch onto it. I'm not going to respond to it emotionally, and it goes. And then here comes another one, and we got to practice the same thing. But we're going to get, in the beginning of our practice, we're going to get latched on. And the goal is to maybe only get 3 links ahead, before we catch ourselves and bring ourselves back to our breath, back to the present moment. And maybe in the beginning you're 10 thoughts in, and then you bring yourself back. That's okay, no judgment. Just keep bringing yourself back to the present moment. I know that I said we'd wait for the end, but I changed my mind. Actually, let's have a little bit of a dialogue. Now that we've described what mindfulness is, why don't we think about some activities that you practice mindfulness in already? Or some activities that you would like to practice mindfulness in the future. So we have someone who says, you do yoga?
I want to.
Want to do
that
yoga.
Felt so amazing.
Yeah, tell me more about your experience.
I was just able to relax for a second, just kind of. You can't do that at home sometimes in surroundings where there's always noise or whatever. So yeah, I did this a little bit.
Yeah.
Because my thoughts were coming and I had to put them back away. Like all of us still for too long. It was so relaxed, like muscles and bones that I never felt focused on.
Yeah.
I found in that time frame. So it worked. It was awesome for me.
I hope there's somewhere in the city you can
I think there is.
yoga.
I just don't know my way around. I'm new here, so
okay.
But I think there are a few classes offered in
That's
town.
If
you
not,
said I could get it online.
Yeah,
too, so.
YouTube. There's a ton of them there. Yeah. What are some other thoughts?
Okay. So actually, I've already had you for CPD 160, and we have the assignment that doing time, doing I don't know how to pronounce it. Yes. And since that assignment, actually, I signed up for Dr. Siegel's newsletter, and I get the emails and all that stuff. And actually, doing some of the different exercises and just I don't have it in one of your space on my phone, but I have one of the apps on my phone, the meditation. And it actually helps me in my practicum with my group because we have a lot of trauma survivors, domestic violence victims. And after group, I would play one of the meditation, one of the short kind of mindfulness things to kind of bring everybody back and just make sure everybody's okay. So, and it really does help. It really does help clients, you know, at the end of group kind of just kind of soak everything in and then process whether or not they really do have a question or were triggered, or they can kind of just find that calm again and kind of put themselves back together, you know, before they walk out.
I mean, it's really cool to watch when you do something like that in group or even an individual client, because you literally feel the energy in the room shift.
Yeah.
Like the consciousness gets quieter and quieter and quieter. And that's what we need to do in order to tap into that true wisdom, that intuition. We have the answers we need. We know what we need to do. We just need to quiet down all of that chatter that's bogging us down. And so I'm glad that it's helpful for your clients and for you as well.
Yeah, you should share the app with a link or whatever if you can.
You
guys know, I wrote his name down in the wheel of awareness.
Yeah, there's a few comments from, sorry, continue, from the folks on Zoom. I want to apologize, you guys missed the meditation exercise because the Zoom, I was in the wrong meeting and everyone was emailing, texting me, trying to figure out what was going on. So my mistake. We'll still get to the lecture, and we'll find a way to get you some meditation. We have some videos of Gemma doing meditation.
I'm sure I could record this and send it.
Well, we already have some. So, so a few comments here. Ricky said he'd like to get into meditation. Great. I'm sorry I'm off camera for the Zoom folks, but you can hear me, I'm sure. Also, Matthew mentioned that we can control our thoughts as they come and go. If a passing thought yields no emotional response, it is kept mindful. The question. Also, if a thought does yield an emotional response, it should be noted. So he's asking if a passing thought yields no emotion, should I think, and I'll answer, and then you can answer him. It's okay to observe the thoughts and the emotions that they evoke, but not to grab onto and hold on to them. So the way I like to talk at one of my groups, I said, we're going to breathe in and we're going to experience our thoughts and emotions like the wind passing through a screen door. The screen door feels it come through, but it leaves the other side. And so we're not stuck in that place. Just like if you watch something on TV and something terrible happens to somebody, you notice like, whoa, but it's gone, right? But what happens to you, or when you think about it, you ruminate on it. So it's almost like observing yourself as another. So I know my thoughts, they are not my thoughts. They are not me. I know my mind, it is not me. I know my body, I observe my body, but it's not me. So because there's this other self. So having that kind of metacognition of thinking about the self, but not as the things that are happening to the body and to the mind. That's, I mean, one way I think about it.
Before you move on, I just wanted to piggyback off of that. I remember the first time I ever took my first yoga class 10 years ago, and the teacher said, "You are not your thoughts." That little fundamental piece changed my life. Mm-hmm. You are not your thoughts. Because, you know, we get caught up in it. We think we're our mind. But no, you're experiencing your thoughts. You're experiencing this body and the sensations and the emotions that it comes with, but you're not those things. It's fundamental. I'm not entirely sure what the question was.
I think we answered it.
Okay.
Okay, also, C.M. McAllister mentioned that there's a ton of amazing TED Talks on mindfulness, some great ideas on there, and the importance of taking 10 minutes out of your day to do nothing, 10 minutes to allow yourself to take time and not think about everything. And it's so important. It is. If you want to be a successful human being in this world and you want to follow your dreams, I wouldn't have made it through grad school if I didn't learn how to meditate. I would have burned out. I was just going to lose it. But if you meditate for a half hour, you feel like you've slept for 6 hours. Somebody told me that, and I was like, I don't believe it. And I started doing it, and I started doing it. And I was like, yeah, I can come back to center. And think about your car going a very steep cliff, like an old school, like Studebaker or something, and it overheats, right? And you got to pull over and let it cool down. That's what meditation is. Pulling the car over, turning the engine off, letting it cool down, let it simmer down, and then you go on your way. But if you never let yourself do that, and sleeping isn't do it either. You guys have been sleeping but restless, right? Sleeping, but the mind is still going like a locomotive. And you do some of these simple breaths, exercises, and you will sleep well because you're changing the track that your mind is on from this chaos, all the static charging everywhere, to one track, and that track is more relaxed, and it'll naturally lead you to sleep, especially if it's the end of your day. But if you keep going like this, it is so powerful, and it is what healthy, successful people do, and people that have tons of work 100 hours a week or whatever kind of insane. I don't do that, but you guys know because you get a lot of emails from me really late. But so I don't know. I kind of lost my train of thought because I started reading this here, but I wanted to. Matthew said, "Thanks for the explanation. I can see the outside self that is part of myself." Emma, a wise woman, once told me the same thing years ago, and it really resonated with me. I think she was talking about your comment. And then Amelia mentioned that Coalition has fundamentals of yoga, mixed level yoga, martial arts, and yoga classes that are specifically for recovering addicts. So that's great. And that's in, Brian is, I'm a huge believer in just breathe. My dad, he literally sighs all the time. But I picked up that habit, and it is so relaxing. You're like, your shoulders relax, there's nothing you can do. Just breathe, right? It works.
I'm glad my emails to you probably allow you to do that.
Yeah, it's like a 4-pager and at 11:30. And then, of course, I'm up, so I respond to her, and it's like 2 in the morning before we're done. Sometimes you'll get them from me about 5 when I wake up. And, yeah. So sorry to interrupt.
Sure. No, I think the original question was, what are some ways in which you're already practicing mindfulness? Because I don't want you to think that breathing meditation and yoga, although those are really great, and there's a lot of research supporting those, I don't want you to think that those are the only ways that you can practice being present, non-judgmental, and being intentional about those two things. So one example I can think of, maybe to get the ball rolling, and the other classrooms are welcome to jump in, just make sure your mic is on. The one example I can think of where it is almost fundamental for me to practice mindfulness is when I'm in a heated argument with a loved one, because emotions can run so high that it clouds your judgment. So at that time, trying to return to slowing down the breath, to feeling myself, I'm present, everything's okay. I know that we're angry right now. I know that we're fighting, but I'm okay. I'm safe. They're safe. That's like an essential moment to practice mindfulness. And then the emotional non-reactivity, I think that might be the hardest piece to practice out of all three of them. But that's a place to practice mindfulness. Other activities could be like some type of arts and crafts activity. You have to be present to do that, and there's no judgment of, well, some people can be very like type A, kind of critical, anal about it. So in that case, it would be kind of judgmental. But if you're going about it a different way, like there is no right or wrong, it's just this artwork, whatever it comes out to be is what it is. That could be a mindfulness practice.
What I do for myself lately, because I've had to, after we talked last year, I take a time. I have grandkids now. So spending time with my grandkids, doing stuff with them, and it's this moment.
Yes.
It's that moment. Their giggles, their laughs, their crawling, the tip over, everything about it. That's my world right there.
Yeah.
Everything else is on.
Being with kids, if you like kids.
It's good.
Yeah.
I don't have any yet.
Being
There's
with
one
kids
here
and
at
grandchildren.
I have 3 of them, 2 of them. Okay.
As long as they're under 3. As long as they're under 3.
So in case you missed that, for the other classrooms, the example is spending time with grandkids, which I guess could apply to kids too, your own children. That can, if you enjoy them.
So you can enjoy them.
Right.
Wait, my kids.
Gift kids.
It was straight to grandkids. I just don't.
For me, it has the adverse effect. Being around children gets my blood pressure really high. And I'm like, I don't know what to do.
Connie asked the question, how is meditation different from relaxation? My response is meditation is a practice that may include breath work and allowing the mind to be empty. Relaxing could include watching TV, listening to music, whatever you like to do for relaxation. Some people engage in lots of work. Now, let's say you're a woodworker, a mechanic, or you like to read. I would say that those can parallel meditation. You're one-minded, you're focused, but you're still mindful. Is kind of like pay attention what's happening to you, to the body, to experience, and also not grabbing onto it. But relaxing, you could very well focus. Some people climb mountains to relax, and they do. They get to this flow state where every moment is so precious. They go into another time and space seem different to their mind because they cannot take their focus off of anything, not even thinking about I'm cold or did I forget?
That's how I feel about cooking.
Yeah.
Cooking can
right.
be a mindful exercise. And you're smelling
And I
it,
tell everyone
and
I'm
you're
not allowed to
tasting
finish
it.
And you know, it doesn't matter. You don't have to do mindfulness. I mean, I think that's kind of like relaxing on steroids. Honestly, but if you find that you are naturally not able to relax, have you ever had somebody told you, hey, relax? Have you ever tried to relax? It's a paradox. I'm trying to relax. Please leave me alone. Or pay attention. Pay attention to what I'm saying. You're not. What happens? Ginger just did it. She looked at me like her dad was yelling at her, and her eyes wide and her jaw. So she's pretending to pay attention. She's not really hearing anything more. She's just doing what we've all been taught to do. I'm paying attention. I'm now in the pretend mode of you're not really paying attention. You're just trying not to be hassled by whoever's in front of you, right? So it looks like you're paying attention. But in reality, if you want to experience anything, you have to relax the mind, relax the eye. If you're going to look at a piece of art, you don't look intensely at it. You look at it, right? You just observe it and you take it in and you say, how does that make me feel? You know, and you notice that can be a mindfulness practice. And so sometimes this stuff seems, people say, I can't meditate. I can't. You can. Everybody can naturally, but it can help if you have a little bit of these tools to help you get there. Most of us know how to, but our lives are so busy and they're filled with so much stimuli, we get away from this ability that's probably been natural for millions of years for human beings. Or look at any animal, they're just fine. They just swimming around or walking around. They don't seem, the dog feel anxious, right? Some of those dogs.
It's because they get to pee and poop wherever they want.
Yeah.
So far we have a few examples of activities in which you could be practicing mindfulness. We've talked about looking at art can be a mindful practice because as you're looking at it, you're trying to check in. How does that make me feel? What's my response? What are my thoughts doing? Cooking, being around children, in the shower.
I was scrubbing my shower. Like I am one of those people where my mind and I do not stop. It takes me forever to finally relax. So mine would be more of like a
Physical
actually
activity.
doing something to relax when I'm not focused on
Now,
it.
the body yoga, that would, because you have to pay attention to everything you're doing. You've seen these moves, right? The point is engaging the mind and the body to such a degree you cannot think of anything else. You become that one-pointedness, like you're on your toe, and I've seen these yogis, in this one-pointed meditation, and they are completely still. But it takes concentration to such a degree that it's relaxing in a sense, right? Because everything's empty, I guess. I've never done it. I mean, I couple back bends with it, but
Anybody in the other classrooms have ideas of ways in which you are already or would like to practice mindfulness? There's another classroom.
call out to somebody in Elko.
Anybody in Elko have ideas? Okay, well, in that case, I think we'll move on. Go ahead. Yes.
Okay, so something came up to my head when we were talking about meditation and yoga. People with schizophrenia, they usually write journals, right? Would that be something that would help out, like mindfulness?
Was your question like writing journals?
Well, people with schizophrenia, when they want to, calm down, I guess it would be some like mindfulness to write a journal.
Absolutely, writing and journaling are absolutely mindfulness practices. Yeah, very good.
Now, with regard to who am I talking to? what's your name? Ma'am?
My name is Elia.
Elia. If somebody with schizophrenia, because they have an organic disorder that may not lend itself to that readily, I would definitely want to be training them first, because somebody writing it, you've seen some schizophrenic patients have volumes of schizophrenic writing in a journal, that I wouldn't recommend that as a means of learning to manage and control their symptoms. So, well, yes and no. Does that make sense? And Gemma's worked in hospitals.
Well, I think that journaling and writing are mindfulness practices. Now, when you're asking the specific question about working with somebody who's diagnosed schizophrenia, what Oscar's saying, or what Professor Seed is saying, is that they might not have certain mental faculties to be able to quiet the mind. And so you can engage them in other ways, kind of like you would with children to teach them mindfulness. You can use tactile, so sensory type based activities to help them become present, like working with sand, the sandboxes. That seems to be something that helps become present. Play-Doh is something that you can use to help reach that population who might not have the mental faculties to be able to quiet the mind. Painting, you know, those more abstract activities would be a good way. And yes, I think journaling, depending on the severity of the disorder, could be used with that population. Anybody else in Elko have ideas of how you can practice mindfulness, or are currently?
Some folks on Zoom said music, playing an instrument. Would that work? Yes.
Absolutely.
Cleaning can be relaxing, especially washing dishes or decluttering a closet. It helps me. Breathing techniques. I'm not sure if that's a question, Matt, or are you saying breathing techniques are a way to?
I can relate to the girl in Elko. I am a guardian of a schizophrenic. A slinky. Plastic slinky. Slinkies will bring him down to just watch it, and he's looking at each one as it's going back and forth. So we actually put handles on it so it can slide over his hand. So it won't fall. And he can just sit there and go this way. We've had to do it in the middle of the store, because when you get into that fit, you've got to get him out of it, and they're starting to be aware of everybody around that's now looking. The slinky goes everywhere.
Yeah.
It's a rainbow plastic slinky.
Yeah, it engages the mind. Yeah.
I never thought of that.
I mean, you could do the same thing with a watch. I had a client who was very anxious, and I'm like, pull your watch out and just watch your second hand. One, done, done. And it just creates a rhythm for them that they can get by. Just music can do the same thing. There's lots of methods. And, you know, this is a vast subject. And what we're doing is engaging the neurobiological system in some way that allows us to kind of bring it back to a state we'd rather be in than the one we're in, you know? Just like taking a deep breath or taking a walk to relax or to decompress. That's such a great word.
I have a question. Are there certain types of mindfulness practices that are I don't know, more appropriate or more effective in certain situations?
The most important thing is the training. The more you do it, the more readily you can pull yourself back. And so I would say what natural proclivity, I'm not saying that right, proclivity that you have towards any kind of action that you enjoy. Because you can just imagine yourself, if somebody likes to scrub toilets, I guess, that's fine. You can come to my house and have at it. You'll be in there for half. No, I have a very clean toilet. I have maids.
I think what you're asking,
No, go ahead.
I think what you're asking, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but you do have to look at the developmental stage of who it is, the population that you're working with.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Like something maybe that works specific, like maybe better or more effective with, say, addicts than does abuse survivors than may with adolescents, you know, ODD or whatever. Like,
yes. So when I was working as an inpatient, as an art therapist, I was working at a specific hospital which shall remain nameless, But they contracted with inmates. And so, I mean, you'd have these guys with like tattoos on the face, tatted up. And here I am trying to do art therapy. And they're like, are you serious? So obviously with them, I'm not going to go right in there and let's meditate. I'm not going to go in there and let's do painting. Not right away. But then I'm trying to reach them where they're at. So I would come up with certain activities, like for example, we would all sit in a circle and I would have a set of like 5 balls, like nothing hard because God forbid, somebody gets mad at they were styrofoam balls. And so I would hide them and I'd have one styrofoam ball and I'd throw the ball to a person and we'd create a chain. Remember who you threw that ball to? And so we create this rhythm and that ball goes back and forth. And then as they're in that rhythm with that one ball, they'll pick up another ball and throw it in. And it has to follow the same chain. And the third ball, and the fourth ball. By the 5th ball, everything gets kind of like chaotic and it starts falling, but they're laughing. And you can feel that consciousness, that energy coming down because they have to focus. Where's that? And it's moving really fast. So yes, you do have to meet the population where they're at.
So what are some of the things that they're learning when they're doing this also? Learn just to be mindful, but what are some other things that you can think of that inmates are learning that they might need to learn?
Sure. Cooperation. Yeah. What were you going to say?
Oh, I said when you're done, I can help you. I was a correctional officer for 8 years. And it's so funny to go through this because I'm not going to lie, when my thoughts heightened during that mindfulness, I was thinking how I was going to get all of us safe out of here if there was an active shooter.
That's mindfulness.
Right? But I felt that was the minute I wasn't relaxed. That's where I let my thoughts go away again. And I'm like, okay, I got 2 people over here. Anyway, so the yoga instructors, we worried about so much and had such a fine line on respecting that those inmates deserve to find peace too. There was less fights for us, less infractions, less assaults. But man, they come in with the cutest, tiniest little yoga instructors, and we're like, we are not leaving you in the room alone with these guys.
Yeah.
So, but we got to a point where we had to do 55 plus for the safety of other people. But it's funny that you say that because all of them walk away with it with just clear minds,
laughing.
But in thoughts of doing it for 8 years, like I said, I seriously was loving the meditation, but at one point my thoughts.
You had associated thoughts with those yoga
They
practices.
they heightened that I had my eyes closed in a room full of people that I don't know, and it reminded me of being in corrections and that. And then just like you said, yoga with the inmates really helped us because they would find ways to meditate at that level with it's like
it's a freedom. You are not in prison anymore. When your mind is free, you are free.
Yep.
These are powerful things, and your mind can go anywhere, and nobody can stop you or hurt you anymore. You think about that. If I told them, do you want to get out of here for a little while and go anywhere you want, be anything you want? Absolutely. Yeah, you're going to sell it to them.
And they appreciate it. We appreciate it.
Yeah, I played that game with them until one of them actually threw the ball at somebody's face, and I was like, all right, we're done with this.
Yeah,
I know.
One person messes it up for everybody. Yeah. It's like a
unless there's anything in the chat box, maybe we can.
Yeah, I think we've answered it quite a bit here, so we'll leave that for right now.
I really appreciate everyone's level of engagement at all campuses. So. We're going to move on to the lecture portion of this that talks about the different structures of the brain that are impacted by mindfulness practice. And just like Professor Sita said, it's not about practicing mindfulness once. It's like a muscle. You have to continuously go to the gym and lift those weights in order to keep that muscle. But as soon as you stop going to the gym, you atrophy and it's gone, right? So mindfulness is something we have to practice regularly in order for it to have positive effects. So this might be a little bit of repetition for those that are in my substance abuse class because it was part of one of our videos for discussion posts, but I'm sure you'll still find it's helpful to listen to the lecture again. So before I talk about what parts of the brain are affected through mindfulness, let's actually talk about the different functions of the brain. This is all based on Dr. Dan Siegel's, you have to hit content on the remote, I think. Dr. Dan Siegel's work, so if you want more, you can YouTube my fist as an example, and if you want to follow along, because you can't see my fist, I'll explain it. So you want to tuck in your thumb so that just your 4 fingers are sitting up nice and tall, and then you're going to wrap those 4 fingers around the thumb. Okay, so this is a model of the brain, and so these knuckles are like the front of my brain, and this is like my spinal cord and brainstem. Thank you. Okay, so if we lift the fingers, we have 3 parts of the brain that we're going to talk about today. Dr. Dan Siegel breaks it into 5, but I break it down into 3 because it's easy to explain to kids, to those who have, delayed factors, intellectual disabilities. It's really easy to explain it this way. So we're going to break it down into the bottom part, which is that the wrist, which is like the spinal cord and the brainstem. We're going to break it into part 2, which is the thumb, which is the limbic system. And then the third part, which is the frontal lobe or the neocortex. It's called many different things. Okay, so let's start with the oldest part of the brain, hence why it's called the reptilian brain. The oldest part of the brain is this bottom structure. This bottom structure is responsible for those physiological responses that your body does on a second-to-second basis to keep you alive that you don't have to think about, but yet it does. Your body's circulatory system, your respiratory system, your reproductive system, all of those different functions are available to you because of that limbic, reptilian part of the brain. Okay, this is the oldest part of the brain. So what do reptiles do? When they're hot, they go into the shade. When they're hungry, they eat. The very basic function. But over time, the brain has evolved and it's gotten this outer layer now. So this mid part of the brain, I like to call it the mammalian brain, because what do mammals have that reptiles don't have? We have the ability, what was that? Emotions, yes. Very basic human emotions, or mammal emotions, I guess I should say. And also, we have memory. And that's what this part of the brain allows us to have. So why is that essential to our survival? Why did we adapt this part of the brain? Well, memory, because if I go out into the desert and I'm starving and I eat this green plant because I'm so hungry, and then I have digestive problems for a week that make me almost die and dehydrate, then I'm going to register that green plant is bad, don't eat it. So it's for my survival. But at the same time, if I meet people who I feel comfortable with and safe with, and maybe we start to build something together, I'm going to register that. These people, good people, stay with them, survival, right? Basic human emotions are here too. Those are helpful for our survival, like love and connection and affection. Also, the more uncomfortable emotions like jealousy and anger and fear, although they're uncomfortable, those are essential for our survival. They help us protect what is ours and protect our kin and ward off danger. The fear helps us stay alert instead of being overly naive and trusting others, right? So these are basic human emotions in the limbic system, also called the mammalian brain, which are essential for our survival. But then what differentiates us humans from other mammals is this outer layer of the brain, the newest part of the brain, the neocortex, frontal lobe. So this part of the brain is responsible for higher order functions and higher order emotions. So the ability to think about the future and to think about the potential consequences of our actions and to plan accordingly, that we can do because of the frontal cortex, the frontal lobe. The ability to think creatively and abstractly is thankfully fully available to us because of this part of the brain. Higher order emotions such as compassion and empathy, the ability to understand how someone else is feeling, and altruism, to give yourself for a higher cause, even though it's hurting you, hence counseling. That's an emotion that's also available to us because of that newest part of the brain. Okay, next slide. You can see this. Okay, so now that I've described to you the brain and its basic functions that have evolved over time, we're going to sidetrack and then I'll bring it back around. So there's a very famous study called the Adverse Childhood Event Study, ACEs study. It was done, I believe, in the 1970s, and the reason it's so famous is because it is one of the largest studies that had about 15,000 participants in it at a medical facility. And so the medical facility allowed these researchers to look at the data, and they were able to find correlations between the number of adverse childhood events, or otherwise known as traumatic events in childhood, and there was a link with how many medical and behavioral health disorders in later adulthood these individuals would have. So the more number of adverse childhood events, the more disorders, medical and behavioral health. So behavioral includes mental and substance abuse. So why is this important for us to understand? Well, the latest research is showing us that complex trauma, not trauma like going into war and it's a one-time event trauma, but complex trauma, a series of adverse events, whether it's living in poverty, being raised by someone who has substance abuse or untreated mental illness, witnessing domestic violence on a regular basis, being in and out of interpersonal romantic relationships that are abusive, maybe not severely, but somewhat abusive. All of these adverse events over time layer up, and they affect not just the function of the brain, but the actual physical, biological structure of the brain. So those chronic levels of cortisol in the brain can actually stop the frontal lobe from fully developing, or it can hurt the hippocampus that's part of storing memory. It can hurt different parts of the brain. And so now the research is showing this. So now that the research is out there and the medical and behavioral health field are moving towards this trauma-informed care, we're starting to understand that fundamentally, if we are trauma-informed counselors, what we're doing is we're helping the integration of the brain so that all three parts of those brains are working together and in unison. Because oftentimes what you see when we work with clients is that that frontal lobe is no longer in communication with the other two parts of the brain. Have you ever heard that expression, she flipped her lid, or he flipped her lid? That's exactly what happens. I don't know where that came from, but it's genius. Our frontal lobe is no longer connected to the emotional part of the brain or that physiological part of the brain. So maybe we are overly emotional and just running on like fight, flight, or freeze, and our physiological responses are in that same way. Our blood pressure is elevated, we're hyperventilating, we've got digestive problems, we've, all of this is hyperactive and this is underactive, right? So our work as trauma-informed counselors is to help bring that frontal lobe down, to help them be able to think about the future and about the consequences, and to be able to reflect on themselves and their situation. And I think when I first started in this field, I didn't have this understanding, and I had very high expectations of my clients when they didn't not have the mental faculties to be able to do what I wanted them to do. And so sometimes we have to take that into account, that we've got to break things down a lot simpler, and maybe using this hand model could be helpful in treatment. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, just slowing down the instruction, like they will get it. They can grow into that knowledge. So maybe they don't have them at the beginning, but if we allow them time and space to, not everybody grows at the same rate, they will get it. And I used to run mindfulness groups in the acute, on the psych ward, and I had like 10 different people with different delusions and psychosis, and then 10 other, I'd have a room full of 20, 30, and I'd have them all breathing together, and they were relaxed and they were calm, and we'd be talking about how the ocean is like our breath, and everybody would get into it, and I was like, man, they should pay me a lot more than they do, because I had them all settled. And even the nurses and the techs would come into my groups because they liked getting recentered and relaxed, and so it was such a, yeah, right, and they need it, because if you can't turn it off when you get home, you're waiting for somebody to jump you when you're at home. So you're still on the clock for one, and you're still releasing stress hormones in your body, which is shrinking the size of your brain, right. Literally. Stress hormones for a short amount of time, 6-8 months, makes you perform better. If it's chronic, it actually becomes neurologically toxic to your system. And so what we find is people who are in, let's say, forward operations in combat and war, theaters of war, things like that, for 2 years, something, their brains are actually shrunk. Their hippocampus is smaller, so they have a diminished capacity to regulate their emotions. So everything hinges on us not staying in that state all the time. So even if you are in a war situation, but you can go back to your tent and meditate for 10 minutes, you can bring the levels down so you don't have permanent damage or lasting effects that exacerbate symptoms of PTSD. This is why these practices are used throughout the VA hospitals all over the country. They know it's some of the most important treatment for this kind of trauma.
There's actually, and I know we have people in other places, but for us here in Toronto, and you'll leave me your email address or phone number, I'm going to call tomorrow and get the information. There is actually a free, it's for therapists, counselors, educators, and they say community members, trauma-based care workshop at Desert View. And I think the information we got was the wrong thing because it said it was Sunday, but it's like an all day long, like an 8-hour thing, and we're all going, yeah, not on a Sunday. So I actually am going to call tomorrow morning and find out when that is, but it's no cost, and it's here in Toronto. Anybody?
Where is it at?
At Desert View at the hospital.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Would you mind sending me the
I sure will.
information? And
Now,
I'll
can I
spread it
email
to
you
my
for the West
class?
Campus if you're not one of my friends?
Oh,
Or I can
Just send it to me, yeah.
Okay.
okay.
Yeah.
Amelia has a question. She says, what happens when the amygdala hijacks the brain? So the amygdala is this kind of emotional center, which is more in, kind of think about in the center of the brain.
So that would be like the thumb.
The thumb, I always think about the thumb as the corpus callosum. So anyway, we're going to have a brain anatomy debate later. Okay, so Amelia's answering, I think she's giving me the answer here. This is where the 6-second rule comes in. Just wait 6 seconds, and wait. This is where 6-second rule comes in. Wait just 6 seconds, cause the brain chemicals, I guess, to have a chance to catch up. So what happens is when we're used to not using our frontal cortex to override responses. So let's say somebody, I got in a traffic dispute, which I want to do all the time, but I don't. I think I should get out of my car and beat this guy to death with my mag light, right? But then I go, oh yeah, I'm a professor and I'm a responsible member of society, so I shouldn't do that. And I stop myself, right? But I have a surge of adrenaline because he cut me off, and so my fight or flight response is literally activated because my life was in danger, and that's how it's true. And so, but if I can breathe through that minute and be like, and then let it go, then I have an okay day. But if I sit there and ruminate on it, and the next guy pulls me off, well, I'm not going to have that 6-second rule effect. But waiting and teaching people how to engage and override, because we don't live in the jungle anymore. We don't live in a natural world where predators are everywhere. We live in a system of laws, rational ideally, yeah, it isn't very rational. But we have, but our laws are based on that, have natural consequences. So a lot of folks we think about who are incarcerated don't they what we call they're impulsive, but in reality they're probably more like natural human beings, and they just haven't had the opportunity to develop those kinds of faculties. But we can teach them, and then they can say, you know what, it's not that serious. I don't want to end up in jail again. So the idea is, oh, well, we put people in prison to punish them, and then they're going to get out. No, that isn't how it works. If we don't, if they keep going back, and we don't teach them new skills on how to manage their life and manage their thoughts, emotions, and control their symptoms of PTSD or this impulsivity that comes from lots of different reasons. Sometimes, you know, and one of the reasons that the brain stops developing in a very hostile environment is because guess what? The brain's smart and the body is smart, and it's interacting with the environment. It says, oh, I guess I live in a really hostile place. I'm not going to need to be doing math. I'm going to be having to murder people to survive. So I'm going to overdevelop my reptilian complex and learn to be very aggressive animal. And they've done this with different species of animals where they've made them super docile or super hostile by how they treat them. So the organism reacts to the environment. But if you grow up in a pleasant, well, it says, oh, okay, this is an environment where these things aren't happening. I'll have the capacity to, because you don't want a really smart person trying to think their way out of a problem. You're going to get killed. That's why they have to teach us active shooter response training, because we're all like, oh, well, what's going on here? Well, now we're dead, right? But if the training helps us go, it's time to act. You know, barricade the doors and throw it, because we've been trained. That's what they call stress inoculation training, and they teach that in boot camp. They teach it to people that are first responders, law enforcement, and things like that. But if we can teach, especially when people are actively using drugs, the first thing it numbs is your neocortex, the part that you know how to do math and pay attention to laws and things like that and drive straight. That goes away, and all you're left with is your reptilian complex, that midbrain, and that's like letting your dog run your life, right? So if you've been using drugs for 14, 15 years, you probably need a refresher course on how to use your neocortex so you can actively engage it and not override your let's say animal instincts with your human brain. So you can say, no, this isn't time to react. I can calm down. This works for a lot of different things, and the more you do it, the easier it gets. If you've never done it, because you've always lived in a very hostile, aggressive place, then you're probably going to end up in the criminal justice system pretty quick, right? But if we teach these kids early on, or people who have had serious problems in this area, then they can have more of a human experience rather than an animal's experience in a human world, if that makes sense.
So, as Professor Sita is saying, there are certain different types of exercises that we can help our clients engage in to help redevelop those parts of the brain that they don't have access to anymore. And so throughout the years, we used to think that you only had a certain number of like brain cells and that was it. And then you kill them and your brain was shot and that was it. But now we have a better understanding of the brain and neuroplasticity, and that you can do certain exercises such as reading or crossword puzzles or just sitting and thinking about the consequences before you act, or as somebody on Zoom said, the 6-second rule. You can engage in these activities to help create new neural pathways in the brain and the more that you do those activities, the more neural pathways, you can think of them like tree branches. The more of those tree branches you have and the stronger those connections are. So let's go back to mindfulness and what parts of the brain we are actually helping when we're practicing mindfulness. So and you don't have to go back to the slide, I pretty much know it now. So when we're looking at that hand model for mindfulness, you can either do top-down approaches in therapy, or you can do bottom-up approaches in therapy. So top-down approaches would be going for the frontal cortex, maybe talk therapy, maybe CBT, very oriented therapy. Whereas bottom-up approaches would be like using yoga or mindfulness to be able to quiet down the slow down the heart rate, to slow down the blood pumping throughout the body, to slow down the breath. That's a bottom-up approach. So we are affecting that very, as Professor Sita said, animalistic part of the brain. And also the emotional part of the brain, because we're quieting them down. We're making ourselves less impulsive. What was that?
I said it kind of feels like it's like a soothing.
Yes. Yes. So that's a bottom-up approach, right? But we also want to look at the brain as far as horizontally, left and right hemisphere. So the left hemisphere of the brain, let me come up with an example. So right now I'm having a dialogue with you. And so I'm consciously thinking about what I'm saying, and I know the list of points that I want to hit and the major theme that I want you to walk away with today. I'm using my left part of the brain to be able to relay this message to you. But also, as we're sitting here, I'm watching your facial expressions and your body language unconsciously. It's all happening, right? I'm not sitting here doing it, but it's happening. And I'm reading to see if you're engaged or if you're bored, if maybe you're confused and I need to explain myself a little bit more. I'm using the right part of my brain. At the same time that I'm doing that, I'm looking at myself, and it helps that there's three screens here to look at myself. But you know, screens aside, I'm actually also reflecting in on myself, and I'm trying to slow down my heartbeat and make sure I slow down my speech, because my mind runs really fast and I can communicate really fast, and I want you to be able to hear my message. So I'm regulating everything that's going on inside of me. That's the right side of my brain. So mindfulness helps us develop that right hemisphere capacity of being able to reflect inward and also to reflect on those unconscious processes that are happening in our environment.
Okay, I want to give you a visual for this, and I'm going to ask Gemma to help me out. Create your hand model. And so see how her hand model is really nice and tight? That means all parts of the brain are touching each other, and they're in connectivity with each other. Integrated, right. So the bend it down, just like it now. So now she's got her spine there and her brain stem, and almost the middle parts are touching. It doesn't look like that way in her hand. The back parts. So that means you can get a signal from the back and very quickly go to the front. If you are disintegrated and your mind has not developed in it's like a shrimp. Yeah, like an open shrimp, yeah. It doesn't connect very well. You have difficulty telling part of your brain to slow down or speed up even, and it doesn't communicate well. The tighter the connection is, the better it communicates with all parts of the brain simultaneously. The greater the neural net, the more powerful exponentially those connections are and how they communicate. I was an old IT guy from the back in the days. The more servers we connect, the faster things we can make things work. Now, imagine all the exercises we're doing is taking that from a loose, disintegrated mind or diseased mind, a mind not at ease with itself. And as we do yoga, as we read, as we engage those frontal lobes, we get a gym membership, we go, I don't know, we do Zumba, whatever, and now we've got a really tight integrated mind, and we can take it from any state we want. We can have it hyper excited or completely relaxed, because now we have all faculties at our disposal.
There was one more thing about the brain and memory I wanted to cover. Yes. Go back. One more forward. Okay. So other parts that are affected by mindfulness practice is actually the memory. So there's explicit memory, and then there's implicit memory. Could you help me describe explicit memory?
I don't remember. Let's see.
Oh.
Explicit memory might be something like, no, I don't remember. You caught that part.
So explicit memory is very like factual memory. Like I know that I have to do this, and then I have to do that, and then I have to do this. I remember faces and I remember names. Whereas implicit memory is like an unconscious memory. Like I haven't ridden a bike in 10 years, but the other day I went bike riding, and my friend decided to take me to a extraneous bike ride, super bumpy, and like you definitely need to wear a helmet and pads and all of that, and I was not prepared. But anyway, I remembered how to ride a bike, and that's my implicit memory, right? That unconscious memory.
Implicit memories can also be related to trauma. So let's say you were in a bar and you were attacked. The smell of tobacco, chew, and beer might affect or reactivate an emotional reaction that you weren't even aware of triggers you, right? But those are cues too that can be very helpful to help you protect yourself in certain situations. They can work adversely because we live in a very complex world where sometimes those signals are present and there is no danger, and other times there are. Like the smell of when I go into a prison. That smell makes me tense all over my body, and you know, right? The doors, the echoes, that cheap paint, that every type of body fluid mixed together at the same time smell, which sticks in your clothes, and you take your shoes off when you go home because you don't want that smell in your house. Anyway, I worked a little bit in some prisons over the years, and I'm like, wow, this is a job.
So implicit memory, riding a bike. Oh, yes. So implicit memory is also called procedural memory, right? Because there's procedures to riding a bike. When you go to work, you become accustomed to certain like routines, and it's kind of like an unconscious thing. Like I get my coffee in the morning, and then I log in and put my password in. It's not something you could consciously think about. So there's this piece about procedural memory that I just started learning about that I think is super helpful to understand when we're doing therapy once you get to that point. So, for example, if a wife and a husband are sitting in my office for couples therapy, and the wife is constantly criticizing him and giving him these like looks, and he knows it, and his shoulders start to slump and slump and slump, this could actually be a procedural memory. His body is just gonna, even though she's no longer criticizing him, he's still slumped and slumped. And maybe he walks down the street like this. And maybe though there's nobody criticizing him at work, now he looks like this at work. So that's another aspect of procedural or implicit memory that mindfulness practice can help us help treat clients. So for example, with when I notice certain body language like that with my clients, I will point it out to them, but I'll have them say, check in with your body. What's going on? I have this tightness in my chest, and I have this feeling like I want to protect my core. And so I keep like hugging myself. I say, okay, let's just, thanks for checking in with that. And then when I see them doing it again, I'll say, check in with your body. Tell me what's going on. It's back. I feel it there. And so let's try to make a conscious effort to soften. Why don't we actually try to sit up straight and relax the shoulders? Maybe you can find a more comfortable seat. And so we can help them release some of that trauma that they're storing in their body through becoming more mindful about their body.
Yeah, so they're not being activated and becoming tense when they don't need to be. Does that make sense? So how are you going to repair a relationship where folks become tense around each other if they can't relax themselves because they're not even aware they're clenching their body, so to say? But if you notice it and you introduce, like, let's say a technique where I want you to trust your partner here, I want you to relax while he's present. Well, then you start to habituate different implicit reactions without having to do a lot of talk. You can really shortcut a lot of this stuff. And if you don't recognize these kinds of things, I probably am not as adept at doing that as Gemma mentioned in therapy. I do notice it sometimes, but I don't always put those connections together. I want them to be more relaxed in therapy. But if there's outside cues and they're not recognizing those other relationships, work, stress, family stress, whatever, intimate partner stress that's related to that, you're never going to get to the bottom of it.
Right.
You can talk all day with them
Yeah.
until you help them retrain their reactions.
Retrain the body.
And you can't run away from every problem you have in life. So you have to learn to manage it in a healthy way rather than an overreactive way.
And one homework assignment that I very readily assign to my clients is, I just want you to be like, when you're in conversation, like if the trigger is at work with the boss, when you're at work, I just want you to almost like as if you're watching your body, watch yourself. Notice your facial expressions, notice the tone of voice, notice what your body does, where it's tightening, where the tension is, and try to soften it. That's it. That's your homework assignment. And then report back to me next week. What did you notice? Was it helpful? Was it not helpful? Was it hard? Was it easy? Whatever you notice. A few more things, and I think we can sum it up. A client of mine likes to, when she is super stressed out, I think all of us are like this, right? When we're really stressed out, we get a little bit snappy, a little bit short, irritable. And I remember we had a session like that where it was like an 8 out of 10. I was like, do we need to continue this session or should we maybe reschedule? I don't think that this is productive. But she wanted to keep going and she wanted to, fight. She wanted claws out. And it was really hard not to react to that, non-judgmental, mindfulness practice right then and there. But funny enough, she came back the following session and she processed and she reflected. She's like, it wasn't about you. And I'm like, I know. And she's like, I went home and I started reading everything you've been telling me about because I haven't been believing you. And honestly, I haven't been listening. And I came across this Buddhist monk who was talking about meditation. And it was an interview. And the interviewer asked the monk, how come you look so zen all the time? How come you don't have the emotional reactions that we do? And the monk was like, that's absurd. I'm human, and as long as I'm in this human flesh, I have human emotions. The difference is because of my meditation and I don't think he called it mindfulness practice because that's a very Western term. The meditation practice, because of my meditation practice, I'm able to have that reaction, whatever that is, whether it's on the positive end of the spectrum and joy and excitement and happiness and affection, or on the other end of the spectrum, jealousy, anger, hate, rage, all of that, but I'm able to bounce back to center quicker. So always here, whereas we, who haven't been trained as much as him, may hang out over here for a while and then bounce all the way back here and then bounce back. So through practice, we can come back to center faster and stay in those other states for shorter periods of time. I think that we can move on to the last slide. So in conclusion, I think we covered all of these. You are not your thoughts, you are not your feelings, and you are not your emotions. Everything in this life is temporary, including those really afflicting moments. Judging yourself or judging others doesn't really change what's happening. It's not really helpful. And my definition of mindfulness, if I had to sum it up, is being present minus judgment. Minus judgment equals mindfulness.
So just observing what's happening, but not adding value to it, just it's happening. Oh, another way to think about this is this idea of that you're not your thoughts. I'm not my thoughts, I'm the witness. I'm not my feelings and my emotions, I'm the witness. So you're observing it, but it's not you. And that makes it so you don't have to be insulted directly. It's like watching somebody get insulted on TV. Maybe it's funny, right? Sometimes you're kind of sick that way, like I am. There's a really nice allegory of that I use in meditation where it says, you notice the mind. The eyes are watching a pond. A flock of geese fly over the pond. The pond makes no effort to grab the geese. It merely reflects the geese passing over it like a mirror. You see this, and as it's still, and the more still it is, the more clearly it reflects the image of the sky and the geese flying over the pond. When your mind is still, you notice things. You notice, I'm angry. I'm cold. This person is angry, but really they're sad. So you get a deeper awareness of your reality, of your own mind, of other people's external experiences. And when you insult a monk who's been doing meditation like they did to the Dalai Lama, he kind of laughs because he said, well, there's lots of reasons for that. But one of his is that he recognizes his own reaction and says, that's me getting mad, but I don't have to get mad. And it goes away. One thing that they did, and John Kabat-Zinn had worked with the Dalai Lama for a number of years. If you've ever been around fireworks or firearms, you hear that bang and you shake, right? Everybody does. Even people who have worked on shooting ranges for years, they still have, it's less pronounced, that startle response, right? They put the Dalai Lama, because he doesn't have one, in an fMRI machine to measure. They're like, why can he do this? Nobody else can. And he doesn't have the startle response. And they fired like what had been allowed as a gun while he's in there, and his brain's just flat, just no reaction. And when they asked him about it in the interview, he said, I hear the gunshot, but it sounds like it's far away, so it doesn't scare me. Because in reality, it is far away because it's not actually going to hurt him. If somebody was pointing a gun at him, I bet you he'd hear it right up close. But his reality, his awareness is deeper and more accurate, just like the clear pond that is without ripples does not augment the sky, does not create a fractured image of it. It's whole. And so he sees there's a gun, there's an explosion, but there's no danger. But if you have been around guns and been hurt by them, you might have a fractured response based upon your memories, your own personal trauma, your fear of guns, things like that. You see how that it creates a kind of, while I understand why you feel that way, it doesn't serve you anymore because you're not there.
If we can only get to the peeling of the biscuit thing without jumping.
Yeah, I just bang it on the counter. Nobody else does that but me.
Yeah, I do.
I just beat it. It's kind of like fun. No, I'm not playing Jack in the Box with biscuits. I don't have time to do my lecture, so you can thank Andaya for that. You guys have to suffer through my.
It was a collaborative.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it was good. I don't know what I want to do. Stop sharing the screen.
So if anybody in any of the campuses or on Zoom has any questions or comments, now would be the time.
I have a couple things I want to mention.
Okay, you want to share?
Yeah. So really quickly, nothing is enlightening is Professor Andaya's lecture, but a couple things. I need to give you the passcode for not having to write a paper. Now, some people misunderstood. They wrote a paper and they put the password in it.
Oh no.
That's okay. They extra learned, right? That's good. Ginger did it. That's okay. So, just to be clear, if you're here and you're listening to me live in real time and space, the passcode is mindful, mindful, mindful 3 times. Put that in your assignment response and submit that, and I'll give you the points. If you're not here and you're listening to this on a recording, then you need to have written a paper. Does that make sense? That's clear to everybody, right? Sometimes things make sense in my head and I say them out loud, and I'm like, I didn't get it. So the other thing is, if you're signed up to take HMS 205, which is Practicum 1, you need to get with me before the spring semester starts, because we have to secure a practicum site for you. Now, I usually have a orientation for practicum, but I won't have time to do this one. I only do it in the spring. So there's only a few guys signed up, but if you're one of them, give me a call. I'll walk you through how to get your practicum. It's like getting a job really easier because they don't have to pay you, and they like that. And I think that's it. Yeah, so any questions before we go? Look at people elsewhere packing up. I can see you people. It's like 68 degrees down here in Rome.
See, everybody just did a stop.
Everybody go to hell. Thank you all for coming. thank you so much for Ely, you folks coming in from, this was one lady, but thank you. I appreciate the effort. I know it's not easy. I think it's a lot of fun to do these things, and I'm going to continue doing them until they make me stop. And I hope you guys see the value in it. It's really important to me. I think it's giving you the best of both worlds, a really solid education through online education, but also that interaction, and we bring professionals in that know their stuff, and we share that. So I really do appreciate all the hard work you guys do in your classes. I have the best students in the world. I always tell people that wherever I go. So thank you guys. Have a great night. Enjoy the holiday. Good luck on finals. Okay.
Yeah, right.
We turn this off now?
Yeah.